The market town of Heatherdown was on the last Friday of September, quieter than it had any right to be. Selina Ashbridge stood at the dispensary window of her stepfather's house and watched the linen draper close his shutters one bay early. The wind had been pushing in off the moor since noon. The sky over the church tower had the soft purple bruise of a storm that meant to keep its word. She set down the pestle she had been using to grind willow bark and listened. The way a girl listens when she has lived for 22 years in a house where the next sound usually carries some new burden of someone else's making. In the parlor above, her stepmother's voice was practicing laughter for company that had not yet arrived. "Selina, my pet, Selina, do come up. The Duke of Edenfell has sent word." She wiped her hands on her apron and went up the narrow stair. The parlor smelled of orange water and a too-warm fire. Mrs. Cecilia Ashbridge, who had married Dr. James Ashbridge 18 months ago and was still trying on the position like a pair of new gloves, stood at the writing desk with a single sheet of paper held away from her at arm's length as if it might soil her muslin. "He cannot come to dinner on Tuesday," Cecilia said. "It is the most provoking thing. He writes some flummery about a tenant who has been hurt at the quarry. He asks instead that times might be permitted, if the weather holds, to ride up to Edenfell tomorrow with the powders Dr. Ashbridge promised for the dowager's cough." "You, child. He cannot mean times you. He means me," Selina said. "He has Camilla in mind, surely. Camilla is the one who looks well on a horse." "Mamma," said Camilla from the window seat, without looking up from her novel, "I have no wish at all to look well on a horse to a man of 36 who has buried a wife. I have spoken of it twice. You have spoken of nothing else but the assembly at Bath. You are a great trial. Selina, what does he mean by it?" Selina took the letter and read it once. The hand was the same plain, level hand that had written to her father for as long as she could remember short sentences. No flourishes, the kind of hand a man develops when he writes his own accounts at 6 in the morning. "Dear Ashbridge," it said, "I cannot dine on Tuesday. Hewitt has crushed his foot at the second face. If Miss Selina would be so kind as to bring up the dowager's drops herself, I should be obliged. The dog will know her at the gate. T. Marchmont, Edenfell." She folded the letter once, neatly, and put it back into her stepmother's hand. "I shall go in the morning," she said. "The road is short across the home farm. In this time's weather, the weather will lift by sunrise. You are very obliging, my dear, to a man who could have sent a groom. It is excessive. People will talk." "People have been talking of the Duke and this house for 15 years, Selina said, "and have so far failed to say anything that signified." She went back down to the dispensary before her stepmother could find a fresh complaint, and stood a moment with her forehead against the cool diamond of the window. The Duke of Edenfell had been a presence in her life for as long as she had been able to set a memory against a face. She had been 7, and her own mother 3 weeks in the churchyard, when a quiet man on a grey gelding had walked her out to see the foals in the long pasture, so that her father might have one afternoon of weeping alone. She had been 11 when the Duke had ridden over with a book of pressed ferns because she had said, in passing, that she liked plants. She had been 16 when she had begun to keep in a small box behind the dispensary jars every short note he had ever written her father, which had her name in the postscript. She had been 20 when his wife had died, and she had not crossed the gate at Edenfell since. The first heavy drops of rain struck the window. She did not lift her head. "He has a code, that man," her father said behind her, in his absent, comfortable way, coming in from his rounds with his coat steaming and his bag of instruments swinging. "Comes for nothing, sends for nothing, until somebody wants something." Hewitt's foot. Bad business. The quarry. "The drops, the lavender drops. They are in the green bottle on the second shelf." "My dear, you will not mind taking them up?" "I shall not mind, Papa." He did not see her face when she said it. He was already at the basin, washing the day off his hands, talking to himself about Hewitt. She left before 6. The storm had passed off in the night and left the home farm hung with cold pearls. The road across the high meadow ran black between hedges, silvered with wet. She rode astride in her old riding habit and her brown boots, with the green bottle wrapped in flannel in her saddlebag, and a small parcel of her own preparation beside it, a lozenge of marshmallow root and honey that she had made the year before, and that, if she remembered rightly, the Duke had once said was the only sweet thing he could keep about him in the saddle. The dog knew her at the gate. Old Marcus the lurcher came out of the porter's lodge, stiff-legged and serious, and sniffed her glove and gave one low-pleased mutter and turned with her up the drive. The house when it came into view was as she remembered, long, low, gray, the chimney smoking honestly into a clean sky. A man in a tweed coat was leading 2 horses round from the stable. He looked up, saw her, lifted his hat, and went on his way without comment. The Duke met her on the gravel before she could reach the door. He came out of the side passage in his shirt sleeves, with his coat over his arm and his hair still wet at the temples from the bath, and stopped when he saw her, and for a single unguarded second, he was a man who had not slept. Then his face arranged itself, gravely, into the face she knew. "Miss Ashbridge, Your Grace, I should not have asked it of you in this weather. Forgive me. The storm came up after I wrote. It went off in the night. It did. Hewitt is upstairs in the green room. The doctor from Whitley will not be here until noon, and the boy is in great pain. Will you come up and tell me whether the drops are enough until he comes?" She came up. She had been in Edenfell perhaps a dozen times in her life, but never above the ground floor. She had not known how plain the upper landings were, how unaffected, how like a working farmhouse the family rooms must be. He walked beside her with one hand turned, very slightly, as if he wished to take her elbow on the steeper stair and did not allow himself to. Hewitt the quarryman was 20 years old and gray with shock. Selina knelt by the bed, lifted the cloth from his foot, set it back without flinching, and measured the lavender drops into a glass of water herself. She put her hand once, briefly, on his forehead, said a quiet word about how soon the bone would knit, and rose. 12 drops every 2 hours until the doctor comes, she said. If he begins to shake, send for me. The Duke stood in the doorway. He did not speak. In the corridor, outside, before she could go down again, he said, "Selina." It was the first time in 15 years he had used her Christian name. She turned. "Thank you," he said. "It is what we do," she answered. "My father would have come if he had not been at the Hewitts last night already. I do not mean for the boy." She looked up at him then. He was a tall, plain, weathered man, broad in the shoulder, with the dark, steady eyes she had known since she could walk, and a streak of gray at his temple that had not been there 4 years ago. His mouth was held the way men hold their mouths when they are not certain whether they will be permitted to speak. "I do not understand you, Your Grace," she said, carefully. "I have been," he said, "the worst possible kind of neighbor to this house for 4 years. I withdrew when my wife died. I told myself I was sparing your father. I was sparing myself. I should have come for the wedding. My father did not expect you. Your father is a generous man. I am asking I have no right to ask, and I am asking whether you expected me." She did not answer at once. She looked at his hand on the doorframe, a hand she had watched lift her up to her first pony at the age of 8, and pass her a book at 12, and sign her father's prescription pad at 15 because Dr. Ashbridge had left it behind on the dining table at Edenfell and could not be troubled to come back for it. She thought of the small box behind the dispensary jars. "I expected you," she said, and went down the stairs before she could finish the sentence. The trouble began the next afternoon, when Cecilia Ashbridge came home from morning calls with her color very high. "Selina," she said, "what did you do at Edenfell?" "Conquing. I gave a tenant lavender drops. You will not have me believe that. Mrs. Carnwath has been in the village. Mrs. Carnwath says you were taken up to the family rooms, and that the Duke walked you out to your horse himself, and held the stirrup, and stood at the gate until you were over the rise. Held the stirrup. Selina. It was raining, Selina said. There is a Mr. Lyle, Cecilia said. Camilla, who had been mending a glove in the window, looked up sharply. A Mr. Lyle, Cecilia went on, of 3,000 a year, and a house in Hertfordshire, who saw you at the Michaelmas fair, and has written to me times to me, child, having no other female of the family to apply to ask whether you might be agreeable to meet him at the Carnwaths on Friday. 3,000 a year, Selina. The Duke of Edenfell is 36 and has buried a wife and has not entered a drawing room above the apothecary's in 4 years. You will not give Mr. Lyle his answer at a stirrup. I have not seen Mr. Lyle. You will see him on Friday. Mamma, said Camilla quietly, leave her be. I shall not leave her be. I have one daughter who reads novels and refuses to ride, and one stepdaughter who grinds willow bark in an apron and walks up to a great house in the rain. I am the only woman in this house who has any notion of what is owing to either of you. I, who married a country doctor and have not regretted it 1 hour, am attempting only to see that Selina is not foolish about a man who has known her since she was in pinafores and has done nothing about it. Dr. Ashbridge, coming in to find the tea, looked at the three of them and turned round and went out again. She went to the Carnwaths on Friday. She wore her plain pearl grey gown and the small coral cross her mother had left her. Mr. Lyle, when he was presented, proved to be a kind, mild, slightly stout gentleman of 40, with sandy whiskers and the particular gentleness of widowers who have not stopped thinking of their first wife. He spoke to her of his late wife's herb garden for half an hour. Selina was unable to dislike him. Miss Ashbridge, he said, at the end of it, I shall not press a point this evening. I should be very glad if you would think well of me. Your stepmother's letter encouraged me to hope. You are very good, Mr. Lyle. May I write you on Monday? Of course. She walked home through the lanes with her cloak about her, very tired. The lights of the Carnwaths' house faded behind her. She had nearly reached the doctor's gate when a horseman came up out of the dark and reined in and lifted his hat. It was the Duke of Edenfell. He had been riding the lane between his land and her father's for 2 hours, by the look of his horse. Forgive me, he said, very low. I had no right. I rode out, and could not, in the end, turn back. Turn back, your grace, Selina. He hesitated. Mrs. Ashbridge wrote me this morning that you were promised at the Carnwaths to a Mr. Lyle of Hertfordshire. I came to know whether it was your wish. She stood in the lane with her hand on the cold iron of the gate. Above her, the Michaelmas stars were very thick. Behind her she could hear, very faintly, the laughter at the Carnwaths' window. In front of her was a man on a tired horse who had ridden 2 hours in the dark to ask her a question that he had. She suddenly understood, been preparing to ask for a long while. My wish, your grace, she said, would be that you should come to my father's house tomorrow at any hour and ask him what you have been wanting to ask him for. By my reckoning, 4 years and 3 months. He bent his head. She could not see his face. I shall come at 11. Camilla and her mother will be out at the dressmaker's? She said gently. It is the best hour. Selina. Yes, I am asking you. Not him. Not yet. I am asking you. I know what you're asking me. The answer is yes. It has been yes since I was 16, and you sent the ferns. Go home. Sleep an hour. He sat very still on his horse. Then he reached down and took her hand, with his glove off, and held it once against his cheek, and gave it back, and turned the horse and was gone. The wedding was the second Tuesday in November. It was held at the parish church at Heatherdown because the Duke of Edenfell had said, plainly and at once, that he had been baptized and confirmed and would be married at the same font and not at a private chapel. Dr. Ashbridge gave away the bride in a coat too tight at the shoulders. Cecilia wept the entire ceremony out of a mixture of vanity and to her own astonishment. Real joy. Camilla, surprising no one more than herself, stood by Selina as her bridesmaid and held the small posy of late white roses without dropping it once. At the door of the church, the Duke turned and offered Selina his arm, and she took it, and they walked out into the cold, honest sunshine of a Northumbrian afternoon together. The village had come out along the lyche path. Old Marcus the lurcher sat by the gate with a ribbon round his neck. Hewitt the quarryman on his crutch and his mended foot lifted his cap as they passed. In the carriage on the way to Edenfell, the Duke held her hand in his lap and did not speak for some miles. Then he said, "I have a great many years to make up, Mrs. Marchmont." "Thomas," she said, "begin tomorrow. Today is enough." He kissed her hand once, very slowly, and laid his cheek a moment on her hair, and looked out at the moor going past, and was, for the first time in 4 years, a man who had slept when the gates of Edenfell opened to them at last in the long blue dusk. She did not feel that she was arriving at a place she had never been. She felt, after a quarter of a century of waiting near it without knowing she was waiting, like a girl coming in at her own door for the first time, with her own husband's hand keeping the cold off hers. And she knew, with the quiet certainty of a woman who had been overlooked all her life by everyone but the one man who had been watching, that she had been chosen not at a ball, not for her face, not against a sneer, but slowly, steadily, and entirely, by the man who had known her since she was a child, grinding willow bark in her father's apron, and had been quietly meaning to love her ever since.